Hello and welcome to the pet edition of the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell and thanks for joining me. Are you a pet owner or did you have a cherished dog, cat, parakeet, or lizard growing up? If so, then you know the trauma that happens when you have to put your little friend down. But what does this have to do with storytelling? Well, if you've ever encountered a vet practitioner who is more focused on communicating the hard, evidence-based science about the condition of your loved one than demonstrating understanding and empathy for you as the seemingly unconsolable owner, then you know how troubling this situation is for you. Our guest today, Dr. Jessica Vogelsang, Chief Medical Officer of the American Animal Hospital Association and author of All Dogs Go to Kevin, shares why she believes storytelling is the best medicine to connect with customers, especially in their time of need. Hey, Park, I have to 1099 your dog Hazel, my friend Pete Walsh said to me. We got our golden doodle Hazel back in 2015. She was the runt of the litter. We thought we were getting her from a respected breeder, but it turned out they were just a backyard puppy mill in Mesa, Arizona. When we got Hazel home that first night, she was sicker than, well, a dog. Michelle and I spent $1,000 with the vet to get her back on her feet, and the puppy millers reimbursed us all of $200. But that was okay by us because we felt we saved her, and we immediately knew we had a special new family member. The first night Hazel was at our home, we were watching some wacky murder mystery on TV when a scene came on that involved a little girl getting abducted. Our small, sickly dog immediately sprang into action, first growling at the TV and then barking ferociously at the bad guy on the screen. We thought that was kind of weird, even a bit spooky, but it was just simply foreshadowing of her personality to come. Hazel became my constant companion at our Phoenix ad agency, Park & Co. My buddy Pete leased an office space from us. Pete is an internationally acclaimed family business coach, and he would often use our large conference room to coach his families. One day, during a particularly heated session, Pete asked one of the angry ladies at the table to take a few minutes in our courtyard to regroup. Hazel must have sensed her distress because she got up out of my office, pawed at the front door, and I let her out. Pete told me later that Hazel went over to that woman, sat down next to her, and put her right paw on the lady's left shoulder. They sat like that for like 10 minutes until the woman returned to the session in a much better frame of mind. After that, all of Pete's family business owners asked for Hazel at the start of every single session. She had come in, worked the room, garnishing pets and smiles, and then as soon as Pete started talking, she would exit stage right. That's when Pete said to me he was going to have to 1099 Hazel for the contributions she made to every person in every coaching session. Hazel is still my constant companion every day at the Business of Story. In fact, she's laying right here at my feet while I speak. I can't imagine the day when Michelle and I will have to say goodbye to Hazel. But until then, I know she'll continue to induce pets and smiles from everyone she meets. That's why I am thrilled to bring you today's guest, who not only loved that story about Hazel, but places storytelling at the forefront of medicine.
The clinics that have had the most success with marketing have done a really good job of remembering you have to center the pet and the family in the story and talk about them and talk about why it was such a great outcome for that owner to trust you and come in, because look at the great thing that happened. We were able to save this pet. We were able to prevent them from this thing. We were able to catch it early. That's what people need to know.
Dr. Jessica Vogelsang is a veterinarian, international speaker, best-selling author of All Dogs Go to Kevin, and the Chief Medical Officer at the American Animal Hospital Association. As one of the first veterinarians to establish an internet presence back in 2009, she is a vocal advocate for science communication, telemedicine, and the importance of the human-animal bond. Today, you will learn why she believes storytelling is the absolute best medicine in all practices, why getting medical providers to open up about their why is crucial, and how marketers have a real and important impact on healthcare by guiding the right messages to make families healthy. So please welcome to the Business of Story, Dr. Jessica Vogelsang. Good morning, Jessica. Welcome to the Business of Story.
Thank you so much for having me on. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we got acquainted last week, or was it earlier this week, I guess, in that I'll be doing some story training for your upcoming September conference for the American Animal Hospital Association. And as we started getting better acquainted, I learned a lot about you as a storyteller and the book you've got out. And I thought, man, this would be perfect to have you on the show because I think, in 480 shows, we've never talked about animals and storytelling.
How could you? Happy to be the first. It's my favorite topic.
So you are the medical director. How did you get to that prestigious role for a very, very large organization?
This is going to sound like it was a planted question, but I would truly not be here if I wasn't a storyteller. I mean, the fact that I like to tell stories and started doing that early in my career set into motion everything else that happened and every opportunity that led to being the medical director here.
All right. So growing up, where did you grow up and when did you, as a young girl, young lady, realize that you were all about storytelling?
Oh gosh, from the time I was little, my grandfather, he told what we call tall tales. You never quite knew what he was going to get, what was real, what wasn't, but he was just compelling and lovely, and we just loved listening to his stories. We didn't even really care if they were true or not, and I think that was just the house I grew up in, steeped in books and reading. So
And then how did you get into animal care and so forth? I mean, studying to be a veterinarian is a very long, arduous process. It's like, a doctor out there. So what triggered you to do that?
I wanted to be a human doctor for a long time. My mother was a registered nurse, and so I had sort of kind of bounced back and forth, and I hadn't considered wanting to be a veterinarian because you always think that the thing everyone says is, "Oh, that's going to be really hard, right? You have to euthanize dogs. You don't want to do that." And so I got to the end of my college career and decided I really didn't want to work with people, and I couldn't imagine anything else. So it was kind of a last minute game day decision, but I'm so glad I did.
I've got a brother who's an equine veterinarian. He had a specialty of artificial insemination for high-end show horses and race horses up at the Pacific Northwest. Sold his practice, but now he goes out and he helps his buddies that have practices all over the Northwest up there. When they want to take a vacation, he runs in and runs theirs while they're gone. And then his wife, Milray, is a small animal vet. They both graduated from Washington State University vet school. Where'd you go to school?
I went to UC Davis up in Northern California.
And then when you first got out of school, what was your first veterinarian job?
I grew up wanting to be Jane Goodall because, again, I read a lot of books. I read National Geographic all the time. And so I was studying primate medicine. And then I kind of realized that I didn't really want to work in a lab. So my first job was in a small animal clinic here in San Diego, where I live and work. So very sort of traditional, what you think of when you picture, a veterinarian here in this day and age of dogs and cats.
And did you grow up there in San Diego?
I grew up in Boston, but I've lived in Southern California since I was about 8 years old. So I got a little bit of both.
I got you. So what was your career trajectory from working with small animals to where you are now as the medical director?
When I was working in practice, along the same time, I had a friend, and again, this is 2009, so it was still kind of early era, and he knew that I was writing in LiveJournal and talking about my online experiences being a vet, and he said, "You should start a blog." And I said, "What's that?" So I started a blog back in 2009. I think there was maybe one or two other veterinarians doing it in the world, and no one knew what it was. So it was just such a weird little thing that I was doing on my own. And I had no idea
And
what was going to come out of that.
What was your blog about?
So it was called Paw Curious. And it was really, I was trying to decide, does this want to be me talking about tips and tricks for your pet? But I just sort of defaulted into what I know how to do best. And I just started telling stories from my life and my work. And it really took off a few months in when I told this very personal story. My own golden retriever was diagnosed with lymphoma. And so I blogged about it as we went through it. And I talked about, even though I'm a veterinarian and this is what I do for a living, I still have the same questions and challenges and struggles and agonies as everyone. And that's when people really started reading and responding, and the audience started to grow.
So did you feel like your storytelling was just very natural? I mean, hearkening back to your grandfather, I had a grandfather, Grandpa Red, and he did the same thing. He had the most amazing stories. And it was like, okay, how much of those are true and how much aren't they? But I mean, was this really from your upbringing?
It's hard. It's hard to say because this is so natural for me. I don't know. It didn't occur to me that other people don't walk around having running narratives in their head. As I go through the day and I see characters and I see the stuff and I think about how I would describe it. So it's in my bones. And I think
Mm-hmm.
other people have other things that they express themselves visually or through dance or, anything else. And words are my
Mm-hmm. In
preferred medium.
conversations with my brother Mike, the doctor, the equine vet, over the years, and he would call me up, for communication advice and marketing and whatever. And he just said that a lot of veterinarian doctors just weren't into that. They weren't into telling the story. They were all about, here's the animal, I got to take care of him, very medical, very analytical, which you want in a doctor. But he said they weren't particularly good promoters of their business. Did you find that as well?
1,000,000%. And it's wild to me because we have crazy, compelling, humanistic stories left and right. And I think you're right. You just kind of forget how cool and unique that is because you're focused on the very clinical. And I think that goes to sort of any medical professional. When you're in this authoritative position and you've got a problem and you want to solve it, you want to jump right to that part. And obviously, when you're in the surgery suite of dealing with something bleeding out, you don't want somebody who's thinking about storytelling, rattling off about back in my day. But they forget that in order to get the owner to trust you to take their pet into there and trust you with their life, the tool that you can use to build and gain that trust is what you do beforehand and what you do in between appointments, which is building that relationship and using your stories in order to create that trust.
And what do you say to doctors that will say, well, Jessica, that might work for you. You're a natural storyteller. I'm not comfortable doing it, and I don't really know what stories to tell.
They say that, but you get them in a room and get them going. And I have yet to meet a vet who doesn't, once they let their guard down, go into those stories. They're all in there. I think it's just a matter of getting over that mental hurdle of thinking that storytelling and authenticity somehow diminishes your authoritativeness. Because I think doctors in general are taught and trained, and that may be changing over time, but historically, the story is you're the doctor, ergo, you are the trusted guide. Like, that's all you need to do is show up and be the doctor. And social media's changed all of that. You have all sorts of guides everywhere now. You've got to do a little more to prove that you're the one who should be worthy of the trust.
Hmm. Can you share with us one of your favorite stories or one that maybe you use to really build trust with your customers?
It was interesting. It is very difficult in a clinical environment. There's not a lot of opportunity when you're in there. And so what was interesting about doing the blog is I was doing it when I was home, right? And so I had time and luxury to tell these stories. And I would talk about, what happened during the day or a really funny conversation with someone. I had a gentleman who would come in and he was so cute. He had this really heavy North Carolina accent and he always talking, my gosh, blah, blah. And he told us this story, and it was really sad about how his wife had passed away. And he was a storyteller too. So he had us riveted about, he would push her around in a wheelchair, and one day he lost control and she fell down the stairs, and he was describing the look on her face as she fell to her death. And we were horrified, gave him a lovely discount. And 6 months later, he shows up with his wife. And we looked at him, are you kidding me? Does he not remember that he told, is this a different, what is going on here? And, we had such a laugh that we just let the discount stand, Yeah.
And you looked at her and said, oh, I see you're feeling better.
Yeah, exactly. We couldn't decide, was this the first wife or is this a new one and we should warn her what's coming? Yeah. So that was a story you're not going to tell when you're at work, but at home I could share that. And
after you and I got acquainted earlier this week and I was thinking about this interview, I thought, wow, what's one of my animal stories? And, it really starts when I was a little kid. My very first job, I think I was in the 6th, 7th grade. I was cleaning stalls for Mo Morris Woodview Arabians. And it was, $2 an hour. We worked every single day except Christmas. December 26th was especially difficult to get through. And we did everything, with him, from cleaning the stalls. And a lot of people will laugh and said, look, you were shoveling shit back then. No wonder you went into the advertising business, right? So that's the running joke there anyway. But I remember Dr. Bergevin, who was the equine vet in the area, he had contacted me. He had did a really big surgery on a racehorse. And he said, Park, I need someone to sit with this horse, all night long, take its vitals and give it this shot. And I have never done this before. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And I think it probably paid me $2 an hour. And I sat out there all night long, and they had that poor horse suspended from the ceiling. It had so many sutures in it. It looked like Frankenstein to me. And things were oozing, and it was gross. And that's when I knew I would never be a vet. But I did my best to help him out, gave him the shots and did all that. That morning, they had a mare and a new foal out there. And the foal was just a few weeks old, and it was spunky, running around and whatever. And he said, oh, yeah, and in the morning, if it rains, go and get the water out of their feed bowl, give them the grain, oats, and, keep an eye on the salt lick. So I go out there, and they knew they were getting fed. That mare comes running up. So does her little filly, comes cruising in. And I bent over Jessica, and I noticed that it had rained that night, and the salt lick, for whatever reason, was sitting in this black rubber bowl that you would put the grain, the feed in, and it was water in it. So those two horses were waiting on me. I pulled that salt lick out, and it was full of red water because those salt licks are kind of pinkish reddish. And I threw that water out, and the next thing I know, I am completely up in the air, flying through the air, land on my back. I kind of get knocked out. I wake up, and I thought, what in the hell happened? Well, I threw that water out, and that filly spooked. And as I was bent over, it kicked me right in the face, just right of my nose. And I remember this was 4th of July morning, because I was going to the big parade that afternoon and running into the girls there and thinking, oh my God, what do I do with this big old hoof print in my face? But I got up, wandered back up to the stable to call my mom or my dad or anyone to come and get me. And I sat there over that phone, and I couldn't remember our phone number.
Oh, boy.
And that's when I realized, I don't think I'm going to go into the veterinary business.
Oh, well, you noticed I said I treat dogs and cats.
Right. But they can bite and claw.
Yes. Everyone I know in equine medicine has some sort of concussion story or.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. They're dangerous animals. So you wrote this book, All Dogs Go to Kevin. And I had to laugh because our son Parker, who's now a filmmaker, he loved the book, All Dogs Go to Heaven. But our cute little story about him is he would say, all dogs go to the heaven. Here, read All Dogs Go to the Heaven, you know. But when you said yours was about all dogs go to Kevin, of course, my first question is, who's Kevin and why do they go to Kevin?
Yes. So it was interesting. One of the common themes when you're a veterinarian is death and saying goodbye, because our pets unfortunately don't live as long as we want them to. So you find yourself saying a lot of hellos and a lot of goodbyes. And although I had these conversations on a regular basis with my clients, I still wasn't that great about this, even with my own family. We're just not good as a society about talking about this. And so when my dog was, he was sick, we knew that we were going to have to put him to sleep. I was trying to explain ahead of time to my young children the concept of uh, the pet's going to die. They're not dead yet, but we know they're going to die, and this is when it's going to happen. And they said, "Well, what happens?" And I said, "Well, they go to heaven." They said, "Where's heaven?" So, well, because we weren't particularly religious, this was sort of a new topic for them. Well, heaven's up in the sky, and there's angels. And so I found myself trying to have this really awkward conversation. And then my poor kid, a couple months later, was sick, get a cold. And he's crying hysterically. I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, "I don't want Kevin to come." I said, I'm sorry, sweetie, what are you talking about?" And somehow he'd written this narrative in his head that when you're sick, if you don't get well, someone named Kevin's going to drop out of the ceiling and like grab you and lift you up into the sky, and off you go.
Oh,
So
man.
clearly, he also has the storytelling in in his head. But I realized, gosh, if I'm not doing a good job, and this is what I do for a living, probably our clients really struggle with this as well. And maybe I can do a better job moving forward.
So that was the impetus for the book. Have you by chance heard Nate Bargatze? He's the Tennessee Kid stand-up comic.
Yes.
He is hysterical, and he's totally clean. It's good family humor. He has this really funny bit, goes on for about 5 minutes, about having to put their dog down. And I know people are thinking, geez, Park, you're awfully callous. I think that's funny. And it goes, no, we all have to deal with it. It's just in the way they went to it to try to prepare his daughter for the death
Yeah.
of their dog, thinking it was imminent. And of course, then the dog goes on to live for another 6 months. So for every day for 6 months, he's trying to prepare his daughter. And then when the dog finally passes, they have to put the dog down. The daughter acts surprised.
Yeah.
But it goes back to what you're talking about.
And I think that's sort of, when you look at the comedy and tragedy masks, right? You can't really have one without the other. And there is tremendous humor and pathos in that. And I think that is, we're embarrassed, or we think there's something wrong with that, when in fact it's what brings that journey full circle. So after I took a little bit of time off after I worked in emergency for a while and got a little burned out on that. My kids were older. I wanted to spend some more time with them. I actually took a job doing in-home hospice and euthanasia. And so it was exactly what I was worried about when I was little, thinking it was going to be the worst thing possible. And this is all I did all day, was drive around to people's homes, people that I hadn't met for the most part. These were clients that called us specifically for this purpose. And I had half an hour to make this connection, build a relationship, and get them to trust me with this very, very profound moment. And that was one of the most rewarding experiences of my career, because what happens in people's homes, and I don't know, if any of the listeners have had to say goodbye to a pet in the clinic versus at home, you're much more relaxed at home. The family's all around, and you'll give a sedative to the pet, and then you wait. You have half an hour before you actually administer the euthanasia injection. And so, depending on their comfort level, I would, leave and give them some time. But a lot of time they were just kind of trying to think of something to do. So I say, "Tell me about your pet. Tell me about Rocky. What did he like? Why was he so special?" And I think we're not often asked to verbalize that, because the relationship that you have with your pet oftentimes is just between you and the pet. The rest of the world doesn't know. So I would hear these stories about, this is the pet that, got me through my divorce or got me through my own cancer treatment. And this was my best friend when I was in a deep depression. And just getting to hear what they meant in this very personal, profound way was just, it was such a tremendous honor. And so when we actually got to give the injection and give that pet the gift of the goodbye, it really felt like you were honoring them. And that's not something that we're good at doing in society. And so it was really important to me that, I had this blog and I had this thing I was sort of doing on the side to say, we need to talk about this. The thing that struck me the most is 99% of people who would come into the clinic for euthanasia wouldn't bring their kids. They didn't want them to see it because they thought it was something scary that you had to hide from them. But it's kind of the exact opposite. You want them to know that this is not going to be terrible. It's not gonna be fun, but we're gonna make it profound and nice, and I think I learned more from one client, about this than anyone else. I'd showed up to their house, and their 12-year-old daughter was there, and they had prepared a whole area in the backyard with flowers and blankets, and they had music playing, and the daughter, before we said goodbye, had a letter that she read. I'm gonna get choked up thinking about it, that she read to her pet, and I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, this was so beautiful." And when you think about how much pain and trauma most people carry around because they haven't given themselves permission or the knowledge to know that that is something that they can have, it really, really made a difference in who I am and how I talk about this with other people.
So your book, is it primarily for audiences that are having to go through euthanasia and how to deal with it?
Nope.
Or, okay, what is it about, or who is it for?
No. So the book is for anyone really who loves dogs and is sort of curious about what it's like being a veterinarian. And so there's 3 dogs, and I'll give you a spoiler, like, they all die. And when I was trying to pitch this to my agent, he's like, "Oh my gosh, it's bad enough when one goes, like in Marley and Me. You really think you can pull this off?" I said, "Well, it's real."
And
And
these
the book's
are
about
these your dogs?
these are my dogs, 3
Yeah.
dogs that I had growing up. So Taffy was my childhood dog, Kikoa was my dog that I had when the kids were young, and then Emmett was my sort of my heart dog that I had in my first years of school. So, yep.
And they all had different personalities, no doubt?
Yes. Very much. Yes, I had
Describe them quickly for us.
a very salty Lhasa Apso who hated everyone, a really goofy, golden retriever, and then the one who just sort of got me and understood me in a very human way.
And you just talked, what, about your life growing up with them from beginning to end?
So it goes through essentially from the time that I was little growing up all the way through my first few years out of school. So the first dog is about my childhood. The second one kind of talks a lot about veterinary school. And then the third part talks about being in clinic and balancing that with kids and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I am very honored to be coming out to work with you all in some storytelling training, in the first sort of stand-up storytelling to share different veterinarians' experiences and the why they do what they do. I didn't know this, but apparently there is quite a big challenge in your industry right now of veterinarians, doctors, and techs saying, "I've just had enough. It's too much stress. I can't deal with it anymore." And they're actually leaving the profession, and or they're just not happy within it. And you all at AAHA are trying to do something about that.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard, I think that there's a perception out in the public that, "Oh my gosh, this is such a great job. This is so fun." You get to see little puppies and kittens and watch them grow up, and that part's true, but also there is tremendous stress and grief, and people are dealing with sick pets, and they're worried, and they don't know that if they're gonna be able to afford it, and so I think that the fact that as a profession, we need to do a better job supporting our own so that we're not gonna ever change that, but we can certainly do a better job of giving people tools, and that's something as an organization, we wanna do a better job of supporting our veterinarians, and not just vets. I wanna make sure I'm really clear about that. The technicians and the folks at the front desk, like, they are all a critical part of this team and deal with the same stresses, and a deeply empathetic group of people that are absorbing their clients' stress and pain. It can get to you pretty fast.
Do you feel like it is a growing trend, something that your industry hasn't had to deal with as much in the past?
It's interesting. I definitely think social media has changed. It's a lot easier now for people who have a bad experience to go and again own their narrative on their page and pile on, and that's new. That's not something any of us are trained in how to deal with. And so if you're a veterinary team and it's not like a restaurant where the stakes are I had a bad meal. This is somebody who's posting about a pet who may have passed away. And so you can't argue with them. You certainly don't want to do that online, but to have hundreds of people, none of whom know the real story, call you a murderer. I mean, I've been called a murderer multiple times. It doesn't feel
Really?
good, at all,
You mean by
and so
you were brought in to euthanize a pet who was very sick, obviously needed to go, and they called you a murderer?
well, sometimes it's the owner couldn't afford oftentimes, it's the owner couldn't afford a life-saving surgery. And so, it's really challenging. You don't own the clinic, you don't make these financial decisions. And so, if somebody is put in this position of spending, $15,000 or having to euthanize their pet, I get it. It's the horrible thing and it burns everyone's soul up. And you are a very easy target for people's grief. And so, instead of training our people how to deal and how to have these conversations, and as a profession, how we help these owners, you just sort of leave it to the staff to figure that out for themselves, and that can get real lonely real fast, and
Hmm.
especially if you're a technician looking around thinking, I could get paid the same to go work at Trader Joe's. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll do that because at least no one is going to call me a murderer.
Yeah, wow. I guess there are all sorts out there, and I shouldn't be surprised, but I could see where that would really be off-putting to
It-
say the
yeah,
least.
the vast majority of people don't, and they're lovely, and we love all of them, but of course it doesn't take a lot of those experiences to really
Yeah,
put a damper in your passion.
yeah. We've always had nothing but really exceptional care from our doctors, our veterinarians, and there's one up in Flagstaff. Michelle, my wife, goes and sees all the time, and she came back to me one day and she goes, "This guy actually gets right down on the floor with the pet and sits there and talks to it for a while." And I go, "Okay, that's weird. I got to see this." And I went in one time with our dog Hazel, and sure enough, he came in and big smile, introduced himself to me, and then plops right down on the floor next to Hazel. And I thought that was so cool. And we've of course, I think I've had to euthanize maybe five of our dogs. The one most recent one was several years ago. Tucker, a Llewellyn setter, got valley fever here in Phoenix, and I could just tell he was always spry and running around and always a great happy dog. And then I take him to work with me and he just lay there and just lay there and he would mope around. I thought he was depressed. I took him into the doctor. They said no, valley fever. And I said, okay, what can we do to cure him? They said he can't. There's nothing we can do. I go, well, how long is this going to be? Well, it could be a few weeks, could be a few months, and he's just going to go downhill the whole way. So I said, let me take him home, hang on to him for a week, and talk to Michelle about it and whatever. And then ultimately had to take him in and had to euthanize him. And it was really, really tough. But I'm telling you, the doctors and the techs that we always got to deal with were so, so compassionate, both for the animal and the owner.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because there's a lot of analogies between the veterinary profession and the human profession, but when it comes to that one part about saying goodbye, we're sort of polar opposites, on the human side, you for the most part, in some states you have this option, but you don't usually get to choose the moment, right? You pull it out as long as you can, and it's the exact opposite in veterinary medicine where we tell people this is the right thing to do, this is a compassionate thing, and it creates this tremendous moral quandary in your average person who says, "I know you're saying that, and it feels correct, but it also feels really wrong because we don't make that choice for grandma," and so
Mm-hmm.
that's the part that I think sometimes veterinary teams forget. It's clear to you because you do it all the time and you feel very confident this is the right decision. It's going to take a little while for pet owners to come to that, and maybe they'll never decide that that's the right thing. And so supporting people and making sure this is a horrible, tough decision, and I understand that, and I want you to feel like this is really hard, but also is the right thing.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's switch gears. We get more positive here. I mean, and like you said,
I think it's positive to me, but again, I get
it's a natural way of life. And our dad, we always had lots of animals, horses and cows and chickens and dogs and cats and whatever. And whenever one died, he was just very matter of fact. He was born and raised in North Dakota during the Depression. And he goes, things die. We're all going to die. Sonny, our most loved golden retriever, he would go hunting with us. He was always there, he died and we were all sad, and our dad would be very matter of fact about it. He goes, that's just life, kids. Let's move on. So
come a long way from the old Yeller days.
Yeah, absolutely. So as medical director, do you work too with your members in their clinics on helping them with their marketing, their storytelling, and giving them recommendations and so forth? And if so, what are those? How if I was running a small animal practice right now in Flagstaff, what are some of the things you would have me look at?
It's challenging. I think the number one thing, and really sort of getting back to the basics, is understanding the ROI. Because again, you make money when you're in the clinic and you are doing a surgery or you're seeing pets. And so trying to understand, why would I want to take time out of my day to do this social media? That's sort of challenge number one. And I think we tend to default to what we were talking about right at the very beginning. You want to talk about why heartworm prevention is important, and you want to talk about, come in for vaccines because they're important, instead of telling success stories about individual pets. And the clinics that have had the most success with marketing have done a really good job of remembering you have to center the pet and the family in the story and talk about them and talk about why it was such a great outcome for that owner to trust you and come in, because look at the great thing that happened. We were able to save this pet. We were able to prevent them from this thing. We were able to catch it early. That's what people need to know.
And what do you say to doctors that are like, yeah, I'm a doctor, I'm not a storyteller. I just don't have time nor the inclination to do that.
There's someone in your clinic who does. It's probably the one that you have to keep telling to put their phone away. Find them, train them in how to do it, because, you can get into trouble really quickly with your younger staff in particular if you don't put some parameters in place. You certainly don't want them telling stories without permission or putting the wrong things online. You do have to be very careful about the stories that you tell, but take that person who already knows how to do it and loves it and invest in them. Again, when we talk about people leaving the profession, that lack of professional development is one reason. Let that person shine and let them do the thing. I'm not going to force someone who doesn't love storytelling to do it. That's never going to work out very well. But most vets are chatty enough when you get them going. So have that person interview them and write the post on their behalf. There's all sorts of things you can do if you find like really smart, clever marketers out there, probably like the people listening here, would be happy to help you figure out a plan.
And what do you say to doctors that say, marketing just makes me feel bad? I'm just a doctor. People should know how good I am and just bring their pets here. That marketing is for other things, not our important profession.
Well, that's why you hire other people. Vets are very self-sufficient. You're raised to fix problems. And I think over 60% of veterinarians do their own websites. It's like, look, that you went to school for 8 years and you're great at surgery. You don't have to be good at making websites. Like, let someone else take that off of your hands. And that's an expectation these days. You have to have a good website. You have to do all these things, and you don't have to do everything yourself. Let someone else do it and help you so you can focus on what you do best. I do storytelling really well, so I'll do it. If somebody else doesn't and all they want to do all day is fix knees and hips, great. Don't feel like you have to do that, but don't neglect the fact that you should probably have someone else around who can, because there is a lot of noise out there. And you want pet owners to come to you first for information. It's a lot harder when they come in with a pile of things that they've read online that may be true or may be completely incorrect. And then you're not starting at zero, you're starting at -50, because you have to untangle all those things before you can get to what the pet really needs.
Yeah, and you may well have that marketing gem hiding in plain sight right there in your office. It could be the receptionist. It could be a tech. It could be, a fellow veterinarian that you didn't realize. Maybe you laugh over a beer with them after work and realize that, boy, they want to actually release their inner genius as well as a storyteller and put them to work doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm biased, but I don't think it's that hard to find someone who loves to tell stories. I mean, that's what we are as humans. So there's someone in your clinic. There's someone who does it. And it's probably that person who always has someone else laughing because they're making funny quips and observations. Grab that. That's your one.
And let them do their thing. Stay out of
Yep.
their way. Feed them stories and let them do their thing.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's round up the show with what is one of your favorite stories from your book, All Dogs Go to Kevin?
Oh my gosh. I think my favorite story is the one I already told you about the wheelchair guy.
All right. The second favorite story then.
I think it's a sad one, so I just want to make sure, like, is that okay? Because
That's totally okay.
So I had a client come in, and he had just gotten back from an overseas deployment, and his dog was really sick, and she had a sudden decompensation, and we had to put her down suddenly. And he came in carrying her like you would a soldier on the field, like he had her over his shoulders. So he brought her in, and we put her, on the floor and looked at her, and we had to put her to sleep. And we had this really, really quiet moment where he was talking to her, and he was telling her things that, no one else I'm sure in the world has ever heard. And I just kind of sat back and got out of the way because it was a really, really profound moment. And then he left, and I didn't, and that was that, right? Didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. And a month later, he shows back up, and he had a little boxer puppy. The first dog was a basset hound, and her name was Jenny. And so he introduced me to Jenny Jr. And it was the joy on his face. It was like, again, the other side of the comedy tragedy mask. When you grieve that deeply, it's because you love so much. And when you love a dog that much, as difficult as it is to say goodbye, or a cat or a bird or whatever it is that you love, it's really hard to not want that in your life. And that joy is what, that's our why. That's what makes it worth it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for that, Jessica. And one final thing here is, again, coming up, the conference in September in Maryland. Who can attend that?
So it is for anybody in the veterinary profession. I'm welcome to come to AAHA Con 24, and you can read all about it at AAHA.org about our conference. But yeah, we would love to have anyone, and we're doing this storytelling event. We're looking for people who, I mean, you probably know better than I do what it's going to be like. You do not have to be an experienced storyteller. It's probably more fun if you're not.
Oh, it's going to be great. And what we're doing too is preceding the conference is attendees will be able to take my ABT training. I think you got a chance to see it in the webinar earlier this week.
Yes.
Yeah. What did you think? That was the first time you experienced it.
I took lots of notes. I actually wrote down, I'll have to send it to you later. I had my ABT written out for the profession, what I think our ABT is.
This was for the sales and marketing management webinar I did earlier this week. And Jessica and I got acquainted on Monday, and I said, hey, we're doing this thing on Wednesday. If you're available at noon on Wednesday, come and jump in. And she did. That was great. But we will be doing making available our Business of Story but therefore story structure micro training prior to the conference, so attendees can take that, show up at the conference, and then we'll be doing, I think for the first time in your conference, this 1 hour stand-up storytelling thing at the end of the first day, and people will see these story structures in action, hear these powerful stories from your fellow members and veterinarians, and even be able to share some of their own too. So that's going to be fun.
Express Yourself is the name of the event, and we are very excited about it.
I'm looking forward to, just very, very honored that you all selected me. Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you for taking the time to be here today. I loved it. I can't wait to read through your book, All Dogs Go to Kevin.
Thank you so much.
If you're locked up in evidence-based, logic-driven communications that doesn't seem to be landing with your audiences, then please take some of Jessica's storytelling advice to heart If you know someone who could benefit from her insights, please share this episode with them. Not only will I appreciate it, Hazel will too. A big thank you to Caden Howell, Marissa Hill, and Darius Holbert for our show's excellent editing, marketing, and music, in that order. And I hope you will join me on Monday when we will explore how to bridge the storytelling gap between sales and marketing with Philip Swan, Managing Partner at Pi Partners and Chief Revenue Officer at Lingo Aid. Until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one a great one. Thanks so much for listening.